I think a lot of people are afraid of ferments and stuff because it's an alive thing. And we live in a society so much where everything's predictable and the same every time. You know, we go to the grocery store and they always have the same food. When you're processing at home, you're not a facility that has this regulated thing. You know, you're living life in your house and there's life in the jar of your kombucha or your vegetable ferment. And, you know, live things just take attention and time.
It's not super predictable. It's not sanitized. It's very creative. It's messy and it's delicious and it's worth it.
Yeah.
My name is Lisa, mother of 8 and creator of the blog and YouTube channel Farmhouse on Boone. Join me as I share with you my love for creating a handmade home from scratch cooking and a little mom and entrepreneur life along the way.
Welcome back to the Simple Farmhouse Life podcast. In June, I had the opportunity to go to the homesteading expo, the modern homesteading expo up in Idaho. And there I met CeAnne from Farmhouse Teas and her husband and all of her children. And we got to chat family business and herbs and had a great time. And I thought, I really want to get her on the podcast because I think that a lot of you will find inspiration not only in the herbal knowledge she has in kombucha and fermentation, but also the family business aspect because they work together as a family. I was talking to her husband. Luke was talking to him for quite a while. They enjoyed chatting, but he and their son do a lot of the packaging, and then CeAnne does a lot of the marketing. So it's a family affair, and it was very inspiring. So I think you will enjoy this discussion. Welcome on, CeAnne. I'm so glad to have you on. I actually did think of this when we met at the Homestead Expo, and then you reached out about it later, but I was already planning to at some point. So CeAnne, for those of you who don't know, is the owner of Farmhouse Teas. It's a lovely family business. And I thought we could chat not only about herbs and teas and kombucha and all that good stuff, but then also family business and what that is like. So for those who don't know you, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm co-owner with my husband of Farmhouse Teas, and we just celebrated our 10-year business anniversary yesterday. So that's exciting.
Yeah.
We blend loose leaf teas using organic herbs, and we focus more on herbal teas that are naturally caffeine free. And most people will think of tea as the Camellia sinensis plant. The teas that we blend are mostly from different herbs and not that plant so much. But my husband we both work full time. This is our full-time income. He started full-time in 2020 during the pandemic, and we've been going strong ever since then.
So since you did the business for 6 years before you did it full-time as a family, what did that look like for you as you were home with little kids and you were trying to run this business in the margins? How did that look? And then what was the transition like when you brought the family? Because I know now your son packs teas along with your husband. They're mostly over in the warehouse or whatever you want to call it. And then you and some of the girls work on marketing. So what did that look like when it was all you? And then how was the transition?
Crazy busy.
Yes.
We started out doing local farmers markets. So it looked like, normal homeschool wife and mom duties during the week. And then packing like crazy at night to haul it off early Saturday morning to the market and spend all day there trying to sell tea and then come home and then be mom again. Mm-hmm. That didn't work very well for very long.
Yeah,
I mean, we tried. It was really slow those 6 years. And I would spend all day at the farmer's market sitting there waiting for someone to come up going, I could probably do a lot more on the internet for this amount of time that I'm spending sitting here and get further than if I was just at the farmer's market. We also did the grocery store gamut, wholesale to grocery stores. And that took me out of the house, had to do demos, had to go meet with the bigwigs at the grocery store that were in bigger cities. And so I was never home. And that was never our goal, was for me to work out of the house. So we took it online and we applied a lot of marketing bits that bloggers would probably use. More than like product sales to get our business going. And that really helped take it off. We weren't quite making full-time income when my husband came home, but he got laid off during the pandemic because he was outside sales. And of course we couldn't go visit anybody, during COVID, even if you're selling stuff or whatever. So we decided I had hit my max at what I could pack. My son was helping, but he was much younger and still in school. And so we decided not only to bring it home put it on the internet, but also he came home. So it changed a lot to have the extra help.
Oh, yeah.
As you know, I'm sure.
Oh, yes. Do I ever? It's something that I have to remind myself of all the time, because after a while, what situation you are in becomes the new normal, no matter what that is, whether that is a harder situation or an easier situation. I have, a team that helps me, and it's easy to quickly adapt to, okay, I no longer have to do this task now, and not really remember what it was like when you did have to do everything yourself, know?
Yeah. Fortunately, it was smaller back then when it was just me, but you can only get so far by yourself. You have to have a team and have help to get any further.
Yeah. That is so true too. So have you always been like the entrepreneurial type? Was this your vision originally that you wanted to market these teas, and then like kind of brought the family along for the ride, or how'd you like cast this vision?
Yeah, I grew up with two entrepreneurial parents. So they're both in real estate. They still are both in real estate. And I think I was trying to sell something since I was 8. I go, starting from the door to door, selling the gift wrap out of the catalog to win the prize, to like little crafty things at garage sales. And I grew up with aunts and my mom that did occasional Christmas bazaars. And so they would make stuff. So I was really familiar with, making things and then taking them and selling them somewhere. The internet bit was kind of a new thing to learn. So, growing up with entrepreneurial parents in real estate isn't really translate into internet marketing sales.
Yeah.
So that was something I taught myself.
Yeah. I think it kind of doesn't necessarily take having knowledge prior necessarily. It takes a drive and a belief in your idea, because whenever you have a little bit of doubt with your idea, then all of these late nights or learning a whole new thing, like you were taking something that you never were taught and then learning how it works, like setting up an internet store, probably figuring out like keywords to market different places, reaching out to influencers. I know you do some of that and affiliate sales. But if you didn't think it was going to work, you probably weren't going to take that much effort.
Right. Yeah. You have to be persistent and almost stubborn. Just keep going. When we started out at the farmers market, we do herbal salves and, bulk herbs and other herbal supply stuff. Now, when we originally started, we did teas and we did salves, and we weren't really focused on any one particular item. It was just herbal care. And nobody at the market knew what herbal salves were. And like the second day that we took them out there, it was really hot and they're in metal tins and they melted all over the place. And, all of the hard work I had to do all myself because I didn't have any help yet, just had ruined all the labels, made a big mess. No one knew what they wore. We could have just quit right there. Yeah. And over trial and error at the farmer's market, we learned, well, people know what tea is. That's, you don't have to explain it to them what it does. And so we focused more on that. And that's how we ended up Farmhouse Teas. And over time, as we get more people coming in, we get, rather than random people at the farmer's market, we get people coming online that are doing direct searches for things like salves. And so they know what it is. And it's easier online to find that right niche market than to just have this, general population at the farmer's market. And so now we sell more salves, even though, we intended on starting that way. And then we kind of cut them back. And now as we go on, we're back to where we started. So,
well, and today there's more knowledge about herbal remedies and teas than I think there was 10 years ago. I think you had to start first with the education piece back then. Now, like you said, I think people, at least people who are following you on the internet, most likely, or following people that you work with, are educated on that. And so it's, maybe you're not having to educate as much.
Right. We work a lot with the homestead community, and they're, they know more about those things than just, throwing yourself out in the general population. You don't even know who the people are, what they already know.
Yeah. Yeah. So where did your interest in herbs and ferments and salves and all of this stuff, where did that come from?
Yeah. I've spent my whole life with a chronic disease. It has no name yet. Nobody's been able to figure out what it is. And I grew up typical American diet with lots of sides of antibiotics, going to doctor after doctor who could never find any help. And so, eventually that wears on a person. You keep going and they're like, oh, we don't know what's wrong with you. We'll just give you another antibiotic.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got into natural medicine and found that, changing my diet helped some. Using herbs instead of antibiotics helped some. And gave some sort of answers. And then, fermenting and all of that kind of came along with those things. Learning to make my own salves and my own teas at about the same time, learning to do sourdough and milk kefir. And, you just start adding one after the other and go down the rabbit hole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So were you able to see results pretty quickly or over time from making some of these changes?
Yeah, over time, just getting well a little bit sooner than usual, or realizing that sugar was really making me sick. I actually have a sugar allergy, and that just came over a process of eliminating things and then trying to eat something, realizing, oh, that thing makes me a lot more sick than if I just skip it, or substitute honey or maple syrup. White flour is making me sick. So, we do whole wheat or einkorn. And so just little bits over time. There were no dramatic changes because it was a really gentle progression.
Well, yeah. And I think that's a realistic expectation, because a lot of this stuff, if it's not a long-term lifestyle type change, probably going to be disappointed with the results. But I have to say too, yeah, over time, a lot of it becomes easier, becomes very second nature. Like, you don't probably feel like it's a ton of time spent making your kombucha or whatever other ferments you're making, and you don't have to research each herb anymore. You know their properties. What is the most popular product? I'm just so curious. I've been wanting to ask you that.
I'd have to look at the numbers. The top two are elderberry syrup mix.
Okay.
Which was an unexpected, unintended item.
Yeah.
And then our chocolate conniption, not coffee, coffee replacement.
Okay.
And our herbal tea, we get the bulk of our customers end up finding us because they're like me. So I used to be a coffee drinker. We'll go back a little bit there. When I met my husband, I was like on a coffee diet. I didn't eat food. I just drank coffee.
Just drink coffee. That sounds about like me. No, I'm just kidding.
With a lot of creamer.
Yeah.
I miss it sometimes. The caffeine's beneficial, but I ended up with adrenal fatigue, which caffeine's really bad for. And just, you have to eat at some point. You can't just do coffee.
Right. No.
But I started eating food and, actual food. I was young in college, and it was just, college and work and coffee and whatever. So anyway, I figured out that it was crashing. The caffeine was crashing my adrenals. I eventually went to a decaf and then learned about the chemicals that they use to process the decaf, and also found that the astringency of the coffee was causing my mouth to get dried out, causing me to get sick more often, just because when your mouth's dried out, you're more prone to catch stuff.
Okay.
But I like the bold thickness of coffee. When I went to get tea, it all tasted like weeds. It was just gross. It was whatever was at the college cafe at the time, and it just wasn't exciting. So I kind of gave up. I gave up coffee. I didn't really take on tea. And then years later, we adopted our youngest. So our 4 kids are all adopted. And our youngest was the only infant. And I was hoping to be able to nurse her because I understood the value of that. The other 3 kids were all 2.5, 3.5 when they came home. I didn't have a choice, as they were raised on formula or worse at the orphanage. So I wanted to give her the best. And she had lactose intolerance. but I was trying to get it so I could nurse her, but I've never given birth before. And so I didn't have the necessary hormones and my health wasn't good enough for that. But I tried, and I drank a lot of a nursing tea with red raspberry leaf, nettle, by like gallons and gallons, hoping to like stimulate something. And then I pumped for like months before she was born. We knew she was coming. And that didn't work for me. So I kept trying drinking all the tea, and it got really expensive because, start drinking by gallons and gallons. So I decided I'd blend it myself and save a bunch of money with the pounds I was going through. And that just led to, other people, can you blend me this? Can you blend me that? How about this kind? How about that kind? And so most of our teas are actually requests from people. And the chocolate conniption not coffee was our original is the mountain hazelnut coffee is where it started. And that was my replacement for coffee because I wanted that thickness that tea doesn't really have.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Bold.
And I still like my cream and my maple syrup in there, and that holds it really well. So we did that. And then, you got coffee in different flavors. So we made the not coffee in different flavors. And the chocolate conniption is meant to like mimic a German chocolate cake.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And my dad is a huge fan of German chocolate cake and coffee, but he doesn't eat that anymore. And he's trying to cut back on coffee. So I made that flavor for him, and it just ended up being the most popular of we have 5 different flavors now.
So tell me about that. What makes it more bold and more like coffee than like a typical tea?
Right. Yeah. So a normal herbal tea is usually made out of leaves and flowers, those parts of the plants. And these teas, the base is chicory and dandelion root. So if you think of like Dandy Blend or Tashino, those kinds of things, they are made with a similar base. And the chicory and dandelion root just gives it its bold flavor. It has a lot of nutrients in it because they're tap roots. And so they go way down and pull tons of nutrients out. They're great liver detoxifiers. They have a lot of prebiotics for your digestive health. Those are all side benefits of it, just tasting similar to coffee. And actually, before coffee was really popular, they used to drink a lot of, especially chicory root, especially down in the South. They'll still actually put it in coffee blends.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I am definitely a coffee person for sure. So it would take
it always looks so good when you make it.
It would take some serious convincing that it was bad for me. Like,
right.
It'd have to be so bad, life altering.
Right. We find a lot of people will, they still drink coffee, but they drink it, an alternative or an herbal caffeine-free tea at nighttime.
Yeah.
So that if they're caffeine sensitive, or we get a lot of people who have stomach issues because of sometimes coffee consumption, the acid in there can mess with your stomach acid and, cause ulcers, or, they have headaches from caffeine. So everybody's different. Everybody's level is a lot different.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, there's no replacing coffee. It doesn't taste exactly like coffee.
But I understand what you're saying. It's something that can carry your spice and your cream. Like if you wanted to make like a pumpkin spice latte, you wouldn't put that in a black tea. That just wouldn't be right. Something like your not coffee, or even I've found like rooibos, or I don't know. Can you tell me how to pronounce that? Rooibos.
Yeah, rooibos.
That also has that same, I don't even know what I'm trying to describe, but it definitely has a coffee alternative vibe to it versus something that would lend itself more to like fruit and lemon and citrus. It's that creamy. Yeah.
Well, it's just a bolder. It's kind of like a chai, which is another popular
yes, I love
crossover.
Chai.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. All right, let's talk a little bit about fermentation. So at the Homestead Expo that you and I met recently in June, you did a demonstration on kombucha, and lately you've started offering flavorings for kombucha that you blend with herbs and everything. And I think this is a popular concept, but also I think a lot of people are really intimidated by it and unsure of the safety or the benefits. So let's talk a bit about that. Like why why kombucha? Where'd you start with that?
Yeah. Well, kombucha was the ferment that involved tea. So that was kind of an
That makes
easy,
sense.
easy crossover for us. I didn't start with kombucha. I'm trying to remember. I think we did milk kefir.
That's
I
where I
might have
started,
tried
for sure.
water kefir a little bit. Ginger bugs, like, like I said, you go down the rabbit hole and it's like, I got all these things. And then you have to keep them all alive.
Right. Yeah, that's why I always recommend to people just get your favorite and then keep that going. You can't keep them all going. Yes, stick with that.
So eventually some of those had to go, or they just sat in the refrigerator and nothing happened. Like the ginger bug, I mean, it's fairly simple and worked fine. And the kombucha, I like all the options you could change the flavor with. Like you can flavor all of, water kefir with anything, but like you have the base flavor you're making a kombucha with the tea, and it could be black tea, it could be green tea, it could be white tea. If you get really advanced, you can do herbal teas like hibiscus. You can use coffee. To me, I didn't like the flavor of that. If I'm going to drink coffee, I want it to taste like coffee, and kombucha, but not together. It was interesting. I don't know. So the kombucha, we found one, we had all, we have tea all over the place. So that was easy. And there's actually some benefits to those who have arthritis and joint pains. And my husband had a lot of the going on, still does, but found that kombucha can actually help a lot with that because of the different probiotics and acids that the other ferments don't have. And he liked that. He used to be a soda drinker. And so it's got a different, it's like trying to explain the viscosity of the not coffee with regular coffee. It's just kombucha has a different like boldness to it than water kefir. I think a water kefir is more light, Yeah,
I would agree with that for sure. Yeah.
And you can make kombucha more light with like a green tea, but like a black tea gives it that bold kind of flavor.
That makes sense. So for those who aren't familiar or who want to try it, a quick rundown of the process for making kombucha.
Yeah. So basically you make sweet tea and you let it cool off. And then you add your SCOBY and your starter liquid. So you have like your sourdough starter, a similar process. You have your kombucha starter. And so you put your SCOBY and your starter in that sweet tea that's cooled down because you don't want to kill off your good bacteria. And then you let it ferment for 7 to 14 days. So it's pretty simple. It's a couple more steps from like water kefir because you got to brew the tea.
Right.
And then let it cool and then add that versus just adding the sugar water to the water kefir. And then, it takes longer. So water kefir is like 24 or 48 hours, right?
Which could be a pro, but then also in some ways it's sometimes we're out of the house.
Keep taking care of it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Like it's something that you're constantly doing like every single day, pretty much. It's, hey, turn over put them into the jars for the second ferment, start the blast jars with the grains. Like I have one of my children, that's her job. And it's always like, hey, water kefir, I just did that. Yep. Do it again.
Time to do it again. Yeah. I remember that. We did a lot of milk kefir. He's like,
I do that every day too.
Again. Yeah. With the kombucha,
every day.
A week or two, depending on the weather and temperature in your house. But like mine's been sitting there. I haven't made any since the conference. I just haven't got there yet. Playing catch up, and it's been sitting there the whole time and it's fine. Whereas like if it was milk kefir, that would be really gross after 2 months.
Yes, that would not work at all.
And you'd have a hard time getting those grains out of your milk. And this just kind of camps out. I've had to try and ruin it to experiment to see, what are the things that usually it just gets dried out and then it'll mold on top. Yeah, if it gets neglected. But if you just push the SCOBY under the bottom and keep it moist,
it'll make it.
As long as it doesn't run out of liquid, it's still alive. So
it's just, it's just camping out there. Like you won't drink what it's sitting in right now, but the SCOBY itself will be fine.
Yeah. You could use it as vinegar, just like apple cider vinegar. You can make salad dressings with it. Actually use it in a margarita instead of alcohol. And it tastes really similar. So we had a lot of those when we got back, because I had 3 gallons. It needed fed before we left for the conference, and I just didn't have time for everything. So it just had to sit. So I had 3 gallons of kombucha vinegar.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was hot when we got back. So basically make like a strawberry smoothie or daiquiri and put that in there. And it's a little tart, but it's still, you can consume it. It's not bad. So
I want to take some time to tell you about our podcast sponsor today, Azure Standard. We actually have an Azure Standard pickup tonight, and I can't wait because there are so many things that we need to get stocked back up on here in our From Scratch kitchen. And Azure Standard is a perfect way to do it. Some examples of things that we're getting tonight that I cannot wait because we're completely out of: raw cheddar cheese, raw mozzarella cheese. I get them in these huge blocks that last us about a month, but my kids love cheese. If they're hungry before bed and they tell me they want something, I just give them a little slice of cheese. Good to go. Also, quality organic butter, 50-pound bags of all-purpose flour and whole grains. I can get things like einkorn flour, bulk spices like chili powder and cumin. I'm using this time of year in huge amounts. You can find all of that plus animal feed and all the things you need around your homestead and your From Scratch kitchen from Azure Standard. So the way Azure Standard works is you go on their website, azurestandard.com, and find a drop location near you. Now, where I live, there are 2 drop locations within a 30-minute drive, so I could choose from either one. There'll be a date that you need to purchase all of your items by. You can go in and edit your order, which is really great. So you place an order, but then all the way up until that deadline, you can keep adding stuff. So what I make sure to do is just get those high priority things, place my order, and then as I think of them all the way up until the deadline, I continue to add. And then when it's the night for the drop, you get a place and a time. Well, the place remains the same, but a time that your driver will be there. You go, you and a lot of like-minded individuals who are also looking for healthy, organic food that you can't find locally, or if you can, it's super expensive. You all pool your order together, a big truck comes in, and you get all of your items. We've been using Azure Standard for so many years, long before they sponsored this podcast, because there are things that I want to find locally that I just can't, like organic raw cheddar. I can get a little tiny block like this for like $9-10, whereas I can, purchase it in bulk from Azure Standard, which works perfectly for our large family on there for a much better price. If you don't want to buy in bulk, they also have options to not do that. If you're a smaller family, you can buy in-season produce for really good prices. I highly encourage you to check out Azure Standard. Make sure to use the code SIMPLE15 to get 15% off your order of $100 or more to a drop location near you. Again, azurestandard.com. Use the code SIMPLE15. Okay, so I'm sure people who have never done this are wondering, how do you know if you can't consume it? This sounds very laid back, and I understand because I've been fermenting for so long too that I take so many liberties. Like the recipe might say 48 hours for something, and I might do a week, but I know it's fine because I've done it. But how do you describe that?
Yeah. How do you know it's safe? Well, generally with kombucha, there's 2 things. The main thing with the process of taking care of it's going to be mold. And
which you can see.
Yeah. And it'll be fuzzy and it'll look black or green and it'll be mold. We field a ton of questions about it because the scobies tend to look really weird. And they do, you have yeast in there and they'll kind of hang and dangle. And
people know what the yeast looks like. People think it's mold if they're not used to seeing that film of. Yeah.
So generally, I had to work really hard to find someone that could give me a picture of their moldy kombucha. I have lots of pictures of very strange looking ones that are healthy.
We actually had the same thing. We were writing an article about moldy sourdough, and my VA and I, we were like, we cannot get our starter to mold. I had to leave it out for a month, and then it just smelled dead, but it still didn't mold. Can somebody? I tried to crowdsource one. I'm like, it's not that easy to make it go bad. Help me find a moldy starter.
The only picture I found was actually a friend who randomly came up to me and she's like, I think I killed it. And I'm like, well, send me a picture because I have to see it. Usually you don't. Well, bugs got in it. Sometimes the kids will come lift the fabric off, or, fruit flies somehow get in there. They really like the smell of kombucha.
This time of
you'll
year,
get-
fruit flies are on everything.
I know, right?
I've been dipping them out of like every ferment I have.
I have a little container of apple cider vinegar in one of those little bottles with the pointy top.
Yes, the funnel.
And right now it's a fruit fly collector, and I'm just going to leave it and dump it when they're done.
Yeah, there you go.
They go in and they can't get out. It actually worked really well, but it was an accident.
I forgot about that trick. I need to do that because I just feel like they're everywhere because we have like baskets of stuff from the garden and then apples now and then our ferments, the
Food all
sourdough,
over
the water kefir.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're just really loving our kitchen. Our onions from the garden.
Yeah. I actually have pickles fermenting behind my screen here. I'm in our old tea studio. This is actually the wall from the conference booth. But there was no room for the pickles and the tomatoes and the elderberries and the zucchini and everything on the counter. So there's food all over the house. But yeah, so fruit flies, any contaminant like that, but you're going to know if you have fruit flies in there, you don't want to drink that. And then the mold. And then like health wise, there's a lot of concern about the alcohol in kombucha. So kombucha, if you're brewing at home, will have 2.5 to 3.5% alcohol. And that's going to vary based on your brewing methods at home. And you can get a meter to test that if you're really concerned about it. I'm sorry, kombucha I wrote it down over here and was looking at the wrong thing. 1 to 2.5% alcohol. It's really low.
Okay.
Water kefir is 0.02 to 2%. And milk kefir was 0.5 to 2.5%. Whereas beer and wine is like 5 to 15. So,
right.
It's in there, but it's relative, it's very small. It's also going to be dependent on how much you drink. If you're drinking a 16-ounce bottle of kombucha versus a 16-ounce beer, you have a lot less alcohol still. I think maybe the people that should be more concerned is if you have a liver issue.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
Any amount of alcohol, or if you're, have alcoholism in your past.
Right. Right.
If you're pregnant, Google Land tells you not to touch anything that resembles alcohol. But, looking at these numbers, I went, well, then it looks like I shouldn't drink water kefir either because it's really not that different. Maybe
that was one of the questions we got from the audience was, what about, and I get this question nonstop, is fermented foods or fermented water kefir, milk kefir, and kombucha while pregnant?
Right. Yeah.
And I can tell you personally, I'm comfortable with it, but that, again, everybody has their different comfort levels. So I'll drink like a quart smoothie of milk kefir every day when I'm pregnant. And again, I'm telling you, if there was very much alcohol in it, I would notice. Yeah. I really would.
Yeah. Well, anytime you have sugar in a ferment, you're going to have some kind of an alcohol. And I think it's a level. Are you going to take a tincture while you're pregnant? Because that's alcohol too. And that's straight alcohol. But
it's like straight alcohol, right? So,
I think it's what you're comfortable with. I can't offer any personal experience there because I've never given birth. So, I haven't had to dive into that other than helping other people, work their way through that. And the other thing to remember is that a lot of that information is based on studies, and there just aren't any because no one wants to volunteer to be the pregnant lady that sees if their child is affected by alcohol and ends up with fetal alcohol syndrome,
I would think that'd be such a stretch with fermented foods. Like you're really overdoing it if you've done that. Yeah. I mean, I give my children water kefir, even after the second ferment with the grape juice. Now, do you give, I'm sure all your children drink kombucha.
Yeah, all of our kids. Yeah. And my youngest, the infant, she grew up on milk kefir. She could tolerate that a lot more because she couldn't drink the milk straight. And they haven't had, all their issues are from past experiences. But my daughter, who is youngest, who is always with us, she doesn't have any issues. So, yeah, I personally don't have concerns giving it to my kids. If I were to ever be pregnant, I would probably still drink some. Maybe you start with a little bit and you drink like a shot glass, and maybe wouldn't drink 16 ounces a day. But, that's just based on what you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
But there's not much science there. And so the precaution always is don't. The other concern with kombucha is that because it has been scientifically proven to help detox your liver, those toxins are coming out and going into your body. So there is a possibility that could pass on to, the womb. And, the baby becomes maybe a filter and gets stuck with some of those. So generally, most people will say to not drink it during pregnancy, just in case. Again, there's not like heavy science on that because your liver is always detoxing itself. There's lots of like dandelion chicory root or detoxants. And those actually will detox more than kombucha. So it's all, what you're comfortable with and your own health, like I'm more sensitive to a lot of things than many people. Like alcohol, take one sip of wine and I'll be asleep.
So you feel like that, but then like you drink kombucha and it doesn't affect your energy levels.
No, the caffeine does not bother me in there.
Okay.
Because it will bother me. Like if I drink black or green tea, I try not to. I am really sensitive to the caffeine in those, even though they're lower than coffee. But in kombucha, I don't find that it bothers me. And the same with the sugar, because you're making kombucha with sugar, but the ferment is eating the sugar. And so while I have a sugar allergy, I can still drink kombucha.
Okay.
So
I've always wondered that, like what sugar content is left, because it's hard, it's not a controlled experiment because the house temperature changes. I'll ferment it for a lot longer sometimes. And then the second ferment, is it consuming all of the grape juice? Well, it still tastes sweet, but it's also very carbonated when I do a second ferment for water kefir. Right. Have you ever tested that with kombucha?
Like you said, when you're in a home environment, it's really hard to do. You would need to be in like a commercial environment. Where it's totally controlled and regulated and on a schedule, like a science lab to be able to do that. And when you're brewing at home, it just doesn't work that way. But the sugar level in the first 7 days, the sugar level stays the same as when you made the sweet tea. From days 7 to, I think it's 20, it starts dropping how much sugar is in it, because what's happening is it's basically the same process of making a vinegar. The vinegar is eating the sweet, and so the sugar level will drop as it gets more tart. So the goal is to find that sweet spot where it's still sweet enough to drink it and it's not vinegar, but it's not so sweet that, it still tastes like sweet tea, which usually means it hasn't fermented yet. And that would be where you have a higher alcohol content versus where it gets down towards the vinegar side of things. So the sugar level does drop because your ferment is eating the sugar. It's the food for the ferment versus it being food for us.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so much of this too, like you said, there's just, it's something that you get the flow of, the rhythm of, but not necessarily the exacts on how much sugar, how much alcohol, how I'm tolerating it. Right. And like you said, you're more sensitive to just about everything. And so you have to test things and then see how you're reacting with sugar, with caffeine.
How did that go?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And, if you're flavoring your kombucha, your water kefir, and you're using fruit, that changes your sugar content because, it's also in there for a shorter time. So it's not fermenting as long. So it's not consuming the sugars. And so you're consuming the sugar. So maybe, if you're really concerned about the sugar, you get kombucha from the store rather than make it, because they have to have all of that on the label and they have to have it tested.
Really dialed in. Yeah.
Yeah. It also has to have a lower alcohol point, which sometimes means that they mess with the natural fermentation process to get those numbers. Most kombucha at the store is not going to be a tried and true kombucha. Maybe GTs, but a lot of them lately are adding carbonation. There's kombucha in there, but I have a feeling it's like kombucha vinegar where they don't have to monitor the fizziness, because otherwise, sitting on a shelf for several days, their bottle might explode or,
exactly. I've always wondered this because I have water kefir here. If I let it go too long, it's going to literally explode. I've had that happen. So clearly something's up like this. It just can't be real because
they have a different process. I think their alcohol limit on the store-bought's 0.5, which is not a natural alcohol limit. Otherwise they have to mark it as a hard kombucha, which they do make.
Yep. They'd have to get IDs and everything else.
GTs, I think, is maybe the only one I've seen that's still, unless you have a small local brand.
Well, and it's so expensive and it's not super hard to make at all. Like once you get it in your rhythm, you're brewing tea, you're sweetening it, you're adding your SCOBY. And then also it's probably encouraging to a lot of people that yours has been sitting out for like 2 months now and you haven't got back into doing it.
Right.
And it's okay. It's like a sourdough starter. You can sit it in the
It's
fridge
still there.
if it's a robust starter for a couple months and then get back to it, feed it, and all is well again. And I've done the same thing with milk kefir grains, with water kefir grains. So it doesn't have to be this overwhelming thing. It can be a very seasonal thing when you and your family are able to have like a lot of time in your kitchen,
Right.
you know, keeping
you
up
have
with something
time
like
to
that.
put on it, or some people might drink more in the summer when it's hot and less in the winter. Like sourdough's the opposite, probably.
Yep. I'm same
Right.
with like water kefir. We've definitely already started doing it less
Right.
than we were because
Right.
having like a cold, bubbly drink was so desirable. And then now we've been pausing it in the fridge more
Right.
often and easing out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, like with tea, people drink iced tea, and we still sell tea in the summer, but we sell way more tea in the fall just because people think of it as a hot drink.
Yes.
And kombucha tends to be cold. There's plenty of people like cold kombucha in the wintertime, but this seems like it do more in the summer.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely, more of it's so delicious to have a cold, fizzy, bubbly, carbonated drink. And that's when we tend to reach for it a ton. Now, what is your favorite flavoring for your kombucha? There's a root beer one for everybody listening.
Yes, everybody likes the root beer. It's probably
my kids like it.
One. Yeah. And the one we released last, so it's quite popular. The strawberry mojito is a favorite, and that's probably our second top seller. So it's like a strawberry lime. Tropical mango is another one. My husband really likes that one. I'm trying to think. We all like different ones. We kind of use what we have from our flavor mixes, because if I go down to I want to decide what to call it. I call it cafe because that's what it was. If it's in a bag and I have to open it, they get mad at me because they're like, just pack that. So I'm like looking for the bulk stash they haven't packed. What do you have? Open? I'll use that. But yeah, my husband likes the peach turmeric and the mango, like the really like fruity ones. The like underrated one is the rosemary citrus. Those two flavors I know are hard for people to put together, but it tastes like a creamsicle with like a hint of rosemary. It's actually really good
with the rosemary. Okay, remind me again, with the flavoring with kombucha, at what point are you using that?
Yeah, so you'll make your initial ferment with the sweet tea, and you'll let that go the 7 to 14 days, and then you'll want to bottle it. You probably want to pull it off when it's a little bit sweeter than you would drink it at, so it still has some food in there. And then you'll bottle it, and that's where you get your fizz from trapping it in the like Losh style bottle. And you can flavor with all sorts of things. You can use fruit juice. Maybe something with sugar. The less sugar it has, the less fizz you're going to get. So like we have an apple pie flavoring, which is popular. It normally needs a little bit of sugar or like some raisins added. I probably should just put raisins in it. Because the clove and the cinnamon have antimicrobial properties. And so it fights against your fizz.
Okay.
Because you're trying to grow bugs to make them fizzy. And now you've got these herbs that are fighting bugs. And so it won't make as much fizz as like something with just a fruit base. So you can use fruit juice. You can use frozen fruit, fresh fruit, dried fruit, freeze-dried fruit. So these mixes are all dried herbs and dried fruit. They're super handy for just like having in your pantry and grabbing it when you're ready, and you don't have to plan and think about, oh, I don't have any fruit anywhere to stick in here or the right kind. So, and that's why we made them to just is super simple. So that's when you would put your flavoring in, is when you're putting it in the bottle. And then you're going to let that bottle sit for 12 to 24 hours. And then you're going to want to put it in the refrigerator so that it doesn't explode when you open it. Some people will just burp their bottles along the way. I don't like to lose the fizz because sometimes it's harder to get fizz than to, tone the fizz down. So we have more people that have troubles getting it fizzy. So I don't like to tell people to like burp their bottle because that might have just been all the fizz you were going to get from your particular batch. So I just like to say put in the refrigerator so it'll settle down, because when it's warm, the bacteria are active and they're eating. When it's cold, they're, sleep or not as active. And so if you put it in the fridge, it'll generally be good. I did have an experience lately. I put a lot of ginger in something like fresh ginger. They essentially combined a ginger bud with a kombucha, and it had been in the refrigerator a really long time. I thought it was flat. This particular bottle was a cheap, like from the craft store, just something I had, and the lid was like not on all the way. And I thought, well, it's totally flat. There's no way there's fizz in there. And I opened that bottle and it went all
you
over
opened
the
it with
kitchen.
Confidence. It's the worst when you think something's
cold.
fine. Like instead of like I'm going to cautiously open, you're like, this one's not going to be fizzy. I've done that. Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I said, next time I do that, I'm opening them, every one in the sink, and I'm turning the camera on. Because I must have went 10 feet. It was all over the place. And I'm like, oh my goodness. I thought, and I'm looking at the bottom of the bottle, because we should label them. That might help. I must have been in a hurry or something, but I'm like, there's a lot of ginger in there. No wonder I didn't look at that first, because everyone's like, that's apple pie. And like I said, it doesn't always get super fizzy. And I'm like, so it'll be fine. It'll be fine.
You weren't expecting that. Yep. So then you take the bottle and do you then pour it through a strainer to get like the herbs out? Okay.
Yeah. So I don't generally drink straight from the bottle. If you're doing like fruit juice, that'd be fine. Or if you want to, chew the things up as you drink it. I don't know. That's not my thing.
Yeah.
I just have a little strainer.
Me neither.
Over a glass, or, if you want to get fancy, a wine glass, and just strain it out as you're going to drink it. If you were going to take it with you somewhere, that might be a little harder to do. You could potentially strain it beforehand, but you're going to lose some of your fizz opening it. So it might just be the one time use juice if you're going to travel with it. I don't generally travel with it because you have to keep it cool. If you're going to let it sit in a car while you do something, it could potentially explode from the heat.
Yeah.
So. And not that should scare anybody from making.
I know. I'm like, hopefully you're not scared of this, because it's just basically, I think, understanding the science of what is happening with fermentation and what your goal is and what is what's happening scientifically will help you to not feel intimidated by it, because you'll understand what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, you might, it don't have that many explode, There was
it's only happened to me a couple times, and it's never happened even in the last 5 years.
Right. Yeah. So my first one exploded, but that's because I didn't understand what was going on.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Lost like half of it. So if you know ahead of time to just chill it in the refrigerator, put it over the sink just in case, pay attention to what you're fermenting with. If you have a ton of ginger in there, ginger is it has a lot of the right bugs on it, so it makes kombucha very happy. We filmed an e-course on kombucha, and it felt like, because I was in the mode of filming and making, and so my timing got off with a lot of the kombucha, and I needed one to pop and make, the glorious pop sound, and it ended up that a bunch of them went flat because my timing was bad, because I wasn't focused on
You're more focused on filming that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Getting all the details explained, right. And all of that stuff. And then, so I kept being determined. So I left one out intentionally, did all the things wrong so that it would fizz. And it was so explosive. It scared me, because I'd gone through like 10 bottles and they're like, nothing's popping, And then this one I wasn't, and I had it like tilted, and it was up here at the time. I have all of the tea, all the totes of the tea had kombucha all over them, because it I've got a great, and it was on camera that time. It was great. So I have a little blooper of, what it
worth it.
Could look like.
Yeah. The other day we were in the pantry where we brew our our water kefir. And my son was like, are there any ready right now? And I'm like, no. I just checked 2 and they weren't ready at all. And so sometimes I'll only check 2 and then just leave the rest, because I know that they were all done at the same time. And he's like, well, check that one. And I was like, Jude, they're not ready. And I just did it like really without, with all confidence in the world. And for whatever reason, that one bottle, either got
Oh,
extra grape
no.
juice or it had a better seal. Don't know. But it was like, psh, and I was like, how'd you know?
Right. I had a
How'd you know
friend
that,
tell
Ken?
me she was making grape soda and they had put the bottles up. It was in a laundry room or something to get them out of the way. And they were up late and they had some kind of crazy neighbors. And all of a sudden they heard this like, almost sounded like guns going off.
Yeah.
And so they're staring out the window, like looking at the neighbors, thinking something's going on. And they didn't see anything. And then all of a sudden she remembered that they had this fermented grape juice and it had the metal lids, not the attached ones, just and they had shot up into the ceiling and left holes in the ceiling.
Oh, we're really scaring people now, CeAnne.
I know that. We're probably not helping.
The key is you do have to check them. Like I said, it hasn't happened to me in so many years because I know that if you kind of halfway like pop the bottle and you feel resistance, like it's going to go, you put it in the fridge, the fridge will mellow it and then you can open it.
And then you can open it.
Yeah. And I know to check them. I'm very aware that that can happen. And so it doesn't happen to me anymore. And I say that and hopefully it won't, but it's, you know, unless you just completely forget about it, it's not going to happen to you, especially as we approach colder months. It takes a really long time. I mean, you could be checking them every day and just get barely a little pop, you know, because it's a longer process.
I think a lot of people are afraid of ferments and stuff because it's an alive thing. And we live in a society so much where everything's predictable and the same every time. You know, we go to the grocery store and they always have the same food. And
Yep.
you know, we get pickles that are canned, and so they're always the same.
They taste the same. They look the same. Yeah. The same crunch. There's no off batches.
Right. And when you're just, you know, when you're processing at home, you're not a facility that has this regulated thing. You know, you're living life in your house, and there's life in the jar of your kombucha or your vegetable ferment. And, you know, live things just take attention and time, and it's more of just a mentality adjustment.
Yes, I love that. That is exactly it. It's not super predictable. It's not sanitized.
Right.
It's very creative. It's messy and it's delicious and it's worth it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not going to be so.
You get to put a lot of artistic value into it rather than it being, I mean, it's a science project to some degree, but you know, and a lot of it's just our culture. Cause like, so our boys are from Russia and all the eggs are on the shelf. They're not refrigerated. They sell, you know, herbal medicine on the street side. There's just all these things that we don't even think about that a lot of different cultures do all of the time.
Right. Yeah. And once it becomes your family culture, it becomes comfortable and easy and it's a process, but it does start by changing your mindset about everything needing to be so regulated, so precise.
Yeah, it's quite different from canning. I hate canning.
Same. I completely agree.
We can green beans because I'm at, you know, I only have so much freezer space and you're going to cook them anyway. But like tomato sauce, I dehydrate all my tomatoes and I just blend it for sauce when I need it. I want canned tomato sauce. Like it, and you know, if you're coming from a canning kind of mind frame, it's the opposite of fermenting.
Oh, complete opposite. Sterilized. So, if anything gets in, the defenses are gone and it'll go bad. I mean, it's going to go botulism bad. Whereas like fermentation's alive. Right.
I feel like fermentation's safer. Like if it's bad, you're going to know. Yeah. Your nose is going to tell you.
Oh, I definitely consider it safer.
Yeah.
I'm still scared of canned stuff. Like I can things. And then when we first open them, I always eat a couple bites and wait a few hours. Cause I'm just like, what if botulism got in there? Like I'm not feeding the baby this.
Right. Or it changes color. Like, is it still okay? Or I canned. Yeah. The most I ever canned was during COVID because I'm like, well, I'm putting whatever food on the shelf wherever I can get the food. I had, you know, food we had all those shortages, you know, like you didn't know. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, well, I can see the benefit of canning from like, it's on the shelf, it's ready to go. I don't need extras, and that's great. But I just would rather freeze and ferment and dehydrate before any of the canning.
Same. It's, I mean, it definitely, is working in a whole different way. So with canning, you're sterilizing it, you're taking away every good and bad thing that's in it that could take it over and ruin it.
Right.
But also the goods, the defense, and that's what you're trying to cultivate in fermentation. And so it couldn't be more opposite. Both great forms of preservation. Obviously, canning's much longer term. If you've done it right, it'll last. And I think again, just like with fermentation, I don't think I have canned enough to feel as comfortable as I'd like to with it. Whereas like with fermentation, and so there's somebody out there who's like, oh, canning's really not scary. And again, I do can and we're fine with it, but it definitely scares me more than fermentation.
Right. Yeah. There's just a lot, I don't know, to me, a lot more risk. But like you said, if you're used to it, then you know, don't worry about it too much.
Well, yeah. When you've had 100 jars of your own canned food in the last year, obviously you're going to have a little bit more confidence about it. Yeah. Yeah. I didn't die. I'm good.
Right. Well, I don't know, maybe I'm a lazy kind of cook or something, but like it's easier to me to just put the cucumbers in the jar and make pickles than to have to like go through now I got to cook them in the pressure canner. I got to wait for it to come up.
It's so much
steam, let it go, let it come down.
Yeah. To me, fermentation is definitely a less involved process for sure.
And I feel like it's more forgiving, you know, like with the kombucha, that it's sitting down there, you know, like people always, but what about this? What about that? We worry about all the little details. And like, well, it's sitting down there, and I've done this before where it just sits for months. And I'm like, it's just fine, you know. Maybe when you're pickling, your stuff gets a little mushy, but you know, probably wouldn't eat it, but it's not going to kill you, you know, if it doesn't have mold on it. It's kind of hard to find somewhere to store some of those vegetable ferments. Kombucha you cycle through is not too bad. And so we put some under our house once, and we just have a tiny little crawl space. It's just a typical basic house. And we forgot about them down there. And they were down there like 3 years. And I used metal lids, which I shouldn't have. They got corrosive, but they probably would have been fine to eat. We didn't eat them. They looked like they probably were mushy, but they weren't moldy. So I feel like it's really, really resilient. I have an aunt from Japan, and she always tells me her grandmother would have giant crock and make Japanese pickles in it. And they would just put it in the closet. And Japan's kind of warm. So I don't know if there was some trick that I missed where they kept them crunchy somehow, or if they just ate them, you know, after mushy. I don't know. I need to ask her.
Or maybe they added a lot more salt or a lot of tannins. Who knows that they had some trick to it. But yeah, I really do love the not unpredictable, because you do know what to expect with certain temperatures, but you get flavors that aren't always the exact same. Like, oh, this batch tasted a little bit sweeter and this one was a little bit more fermented. And yeah, I enjoy that aspect of it.
It brings a little more vibrance to life to have some slight changes.
I agree. Okay, we've bounced back and forth a bit between herbs, which is what you specialize in, kombucha, fermentation, and then also business. Let's just close out talking about business. So for those who are thinking about starting some kind of business, so you say that you were a college dropout, and then now you have the 6-figure business that you built while being a homeschool mom. Do you feel like that's possible for people still today? Is it too late? If somebody wants to chase that kind of dream, what would be your encouragement, or would you say just don't do it?
I would never discourage anybody from starting a business. You know, Leonardo da Vinci painted the Sistine Chapel when he was 80. I don't think it's too late.
Wow. Yeah.
I think if you're determined, you can do it. I feel like I grew up with a lot of that entrepreneurial spirit and example. My husband didn't, on the other hand. And so for him, it's been harder. He does really good. He processes everything, and he's set up the systems. And so I think some of it depends on your personality. And then who you have to work with, because you can get help with the things that maybe you struggle with and don't understand. But we coach a lot of small businesses that are getting started. And I don't think it's too late. I think the internet has just like created a wealth of opportunity for people. Because if we tried to do this locally, it would be much harder. We started there, and it's hard to find the right audience of people, especially if you live in a smaller town like us and you don't want to go to a big city. But on the internet, it's a lot easier to find.
You can find your people.
Those people. Yeah. And that's what I would tell anyone that wanted to start a business is you need someone to sell something to, or you just have a hobby.
Yeah.
And so you really need to find people. And I think that's what helped us to take off is that, Farmhouse Teas wasn't our original name. It was St. Fiacre's Farm. And it was really hard for people to say and to spell as a French word. And it didn't tell them what we did. We were really into homesteading, so we just picked a name for our farm. And, at the time we weren't focused on tea. We were just focused on making things and selling them. And I think that focus is really what drove the business is like, okay, we serve mostly the homesteading community, which is where the farmhouse scene came from. And, it's about finding those people to serve rather than just, I have this thing that I make and I'm really excited about it. It's not about us. It's about serving the other people. And, for me, because I understand with being sick for so long that it's not fun and it's hard and the other people are suffering from various illnesses. So our goal is always to help them be well, to get them, off the sugar-laden soda and help their diabetes with kombucha. This kombucha has been scientifically proven in a human trial to reduce your blood sugar. And it's just one more step. And so if you can find someone to serve with a craft you have, that's like how you get your business to just take off.
Yeah. I love that because it's not just the product, it's how it's positioned, because there could be, you said you coach other small businesses and I'm sure all of them are very, very different, but yet you still can bring the knowledge of how you would grow it despite whether it's tea or, I don't know, any insert small business here.
Right. Yeah. It's all about just finding those customers to serve with what you have, whether that be, a t-shirt design or, a YouTube channel or, a bag of tea. It's all about, having someone that you're helping.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that really sums it up. Well, tell the listeners where they can best follow along with you, where they can get your teas.
Yeah. I didn't write down your code. Do you remember? Because you have, is it Farmhouse?
Farmhouse 20. Farmhouse 20 is a coupon code that you mentioned. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And I think it's good for 10% off. So you can find us at farmhouseteas.com for tea. We teach about herbs in general and kombucha and dehydrating, growing herbs, from the beginning of growing the herbs and planting them to harvesting them to turning them into teas. And, just from a medicinal perspective over at our blog at growcreatesip.com. And I think that covered all your questions.
Yeah. And we'll leave links down in the show notes below.
Yeah, and we do have a YouTube channel. I'm trying to get back on there. I got sick and so we got deterred, but it's Farmhouse Teas on YouTube.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, CeAnne. I really appreciate you sharing. And
yeah, thanks for having me. It was good to chat with you again.
Yeah,
when we are not distracted by other things.
Right, exactly. All right, well, I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you in the next episode of the Simple Farmhouse Life podcast.